Hey everyone, Sean Frangella here with another new Cinema 4D video about 5 more of my top R16 features in the new release of Cinema 4D. So it is still August 2014 and the release of Cinema 4D R16 is just around the corner, and as soon as it was announced I had my top 5 video of some of my favorite features that I put up as soon as I legally could talk about it. And I've had some time to play with some other stuff and keep digging into all the features and content, and there's so much more that I wanted to make a follow-up video with 5 more of my favorite features because there's just so much in there that I feel like we could keep going. I could have my top 100 features, but you know, everyone likes their list format and their top 5 lists, so I'll stick to that. So in my first video I talked about things like the bevel deformer and motion tracking and the big new reflectance tab and some other things, and in this one I want to continue on from that and talk about some of my other favorite things because the list just keeps going. There's so much stuff to play with. I couldn't stop at 5, but we'll still do 1 to 5 because, you know, we like our lists. So again, we'll start a little small and kind of build up to all the fun stuff and bells and whistles. And because there's so many new features, I'll sprinkle in lots of little tips on other stuff along the way, as well as some of the previous stuff I talked about, just so we're really keeping up with all the new stuff because there's so much stuff and it's going to change a lot of stuff and a lot of way we do work. All right, enough of me talking. Let's get started with the list. Number 1, the annotation tag and annotations. So this is a little one, but if I hide everything else but this little text container that I got here, and I can do that with the new solo switch, so shout out to my last video, but it needs to be hierarchy. What I have here is this group of objects that's mo text and 2 cubes, and it's in a container, and I'm actually using the new bevel deformer to bevel those consistently in this whole null. So there's a little bit of a complex hierarchy because I have my mo text and that has to go in a connect object, and then there's 2 cubes and that's in a null, and I'm using this deformer to bevel them all evenly. So if I wanted to make any changes with the new bevel deformer, I could do that. And you can see that there's this new annotation that comes up, and this is something that's really useful. You know, it's not the most exciting thing because it's not crazy reflections or gears flying around, but it's something that's really important. And Cinema 4D files in major projects do get sent between different people, and I do a lot of new stuff here in Chicago, and this is something that happens if we get files that are made in New York or somewhere else, and they have the whole file done, and to change it over, they just need to change one little thing like the date or, you know, Chicago to New York, and change some colors to do some really great stuff. In Cinema 4D, the hierarchies can get a little complex, and that's fine. But if you didn't make it yourself, it can be a little confusing. And rather than have a call or something, now you can just say, look at the notes. For example, in this case, if I made this whole animation, but I know that there's a couple things that can break it and a couple things that people need to remember, I could just add a new tag. So let's say I'm going to send this out and it's going to New York, and I just want to note to them, just change this text, reset the kerning, don't delete connect object. Now in this whole thing or any of these parts, I can right click, tags, and go to annotation, and that's going to pop up an annotation. You can see there's some options down here, so I can type, and I'll just type in change city name, don't, capital don't, because it's important, delete connect object. So that'll be linked here, and it won't matter when it's rendering, but it's a little note that they'll definitely see. And this tag has some customization options, which is nice. You know, maybe my whole scene is purple and I don't want purple. I could change this to a color that stands out. So maybe I'll do like, you know, red. Probably not the best for the gold texture I had in this, but that's fine. And you can have it scale with this. So if I was moving the camera back, it's still going to stay the same size. So if it's something way in the background, people notice it. You can change the color. You can fold it. So if we just want to say annotation, then you have to unfold it if you don't want it in the way. And you can add a link. So maybe there's a link for instructions. Maybe it's a brand guideline or something, or it's my website. Haha. You can add a link. And there used to be a URL tag, but this is a lot more thorough. And it's really useful for these sorts of projects. So you can very easily just get the text and say, okay, it's New York now, and I'm going to go to Motex and just scale it down, and remember to reset the kerning if that's what I noted to the person I was sending it to, and then you can make sure things are consistent. You don't have to waste time, and it's a nice little feature that is helpful without having to write an excessive email or add some other things. So let's get to the bigger stuff. Let's keep moving. Number 2, Deformer Falloff. So this is one of those extra little features that I didn't make it into my top 5 because it seems like a little thing at the beginning. It's not even in the main little button or something, but it's so crazy and powerful what we can do with this. So here I just have a cube, and I'll delete my deformer, and say just I wanted a basic taper. So I'll just go to deformer, taper, and I'll drop that under it, and then I can click it and under object, fit to parent, and then I can taper it. So I can taper the top and change the curvature and animate that if I want it to be all goofy. And that's usually pretty much it. But now there's this fall off tab, and this can get pretty nuts. So we can change how this fall off happens and create completely different looks from this. And this goes for any deformer. So I can go to shape and make this something like a box. And I'm not seeing it because I have solo on, so I'll turn that off. And now you can see that there's a box around it, and now I don't have to have just these basic ones. I can change how it falls off in the end. So I can change the weight of it, and you can see we're getting different looks because we can turn that up and down. We can change X, Y, Z, so we want to be bigger or smaller, or offset X, Y, Z if we want it to move in and out. And we can turn up and down the fall off on that, so then it's not there at all. And you can see that there's that red cube that's kind of putting it in the middle of it. And we can change the line in the spline of how it's being drawn. So if I, on this fall off function, you can see there's spline, linear, and all sorts of other stuff. I'll leave it on spline, but I can right click in here and do something like spline presets cubic, and then you can see it's applying this spline that I can completely customize to that fall off. And that's still just a taper. And then we could animate all this stuff on and off with the easier keyframing that I mentioned in the last video. So if you want to just change the scale from something like 80, which looks kind of goofy here, just click to turn it on, go ahead in time and turn it up to, 100 or whatever. Click again without having to command click because that's new too. Then I'll just solo this hierarchy again, just so I don't have to see all the other stuff in my scene. And we get all sorts of really unique animation with just editing the fall off, and we're just editing the scale. So pretty unique stuff. And keep in mind, this can go any deformer. So there's so much stuff you could do with this. So that's a good one. Let's keep on going. Get into the big ones. Number 3, gears or cogwheels. And yes, it has to have 2 exclamation points. So if you've seen anything in the news about R16 or been checking out any of the new content, everyone's talking about these gears, and I don't know how it didn't make it into my first list, but I only had 5 slots, so you got to cut something somewhere and save it for the next video. But there is this whole new system to build gears, cogwheels, and all of these awesome shapes really easily, and they're built to work really well with dynamics and be able to twist each other around and edit all the properties, and it just makes so many things easier, like gears or hubcaps or a revolver part. If you want to build a shape that has circles and shapes evenly spaced, it used to be a really complicated process, and that's no fault of Cinema 4D. It's just a process of modeling and trying out how to come up with really tricky geometry and be really good at math and split things up really exactly evenly. And we don't have to do that anymore because there's this great new feature. So for this one, I'll just make a new file, and under our splines we still have all what looks like the same thing, and there's cogwheel, but now there's so many features in this and you can do so much with it. So it's still our basic cogwheel, and we can drop it into an extrude object. So we'll just drop that in. And this is what it used to look like in object. If you click legacy, there's teeth and then a radius, and that's it. You can make a gear. Now, if you look at the new one, there's teeth and inlay, and there's all these menus, and you can do so much cool stuff with it. And let's just show some examples. So here's our gear, but we can add more teeth. We can change the orientation. We can undercut it and change in here. You can pull it in and out. Look at that. And there's so many settings in this. And I just recently went on a cross-country train trip with my wife, and it was a 48-hour trip, and I had a lot of time to kill, and I was really excited to play around with all of these gears features. She read some books and did some iPad games, and I was all gung-ho about I'm going to figure out how to use these gears. So, it was a good 48-hour trip. If you're having an Amtrak, I recommend spending some time with all these settings and gears because it will definitely pass the time. So anyway, we got all these features. We can change at first the teeth type. So we can change to involute to ratchet. So now we got this saw that we can scale up to flat, which has its use, which I'll get to in a minute. So let's just leave it on involute. And what's great about this is you can change all these features. And I've been looking around at other objects. I was staring in a hotel room up at a sprinkler system, and I realized, that's a really easy thing to make with this. Look at that. There's a sprinkler, and we can just make it wider, change the pitch radius. You can see that they're all interactively changing and reworking themselves to make sense. And if you are ever bored or in church or something, which is the most boring thing I can think of, and you need something to do, you can always just look around and try and think about how to make stuff in 3D, and it's still like it's being productive. So we have our teeth. I'll turn that back up. Maybe it's a normal gear. And then we can go to inlay, and there's this whole system of how to deal with this. Right now it's just a hole, but we can do things like spokes, and look at that, it's like a wheel. We'd have like an old wooden wheel. We change it to holes, and that's how we could kind of get, you know, our hubcap or waves and arches. I don't know what object really looks like that, but that's, you know, cool looking. There's arches, and all of these are animatable. So if we wanted to kind of adjust this a little and say this orientation, you could just animate this orientation by just clicking and going ahead to the end with Shift G and then clicking, Shift up to the beginning. And then you have keyframes, and new updated keyframe thing, you can just click and hold rather than right click and get to delete track if you didn't want it. Extra little tip there for R16. And what's really cool about these, if we go back to teeth and add more teeth, you can see it scales up and down when it adds teeth. And this is because if we make a copy of this, there's actually some science behind this, and they'll all match up. You can see that they're actually going to match. And if I go back to my original scene with all of these, you can see that I added some dynamics. You can do some really cool stuff with just dropping some dynamics tags on. In this case, this is the only one with animation properties happening, and then they're just all moving because they're interacting with this first gear. So if I play this, you can see that this first one is driving this one, which is driving this one, which is both setting on these little cylinders, and it's all going because of this. You can do some really cool stuff with dynamics with them and change some tags and get some really cool gear animations going. And I saw a really crazy animation that Chris Schmidt did of Grayscale Gorilla, if anyone's seen that, where it's about 100 gears and there's tons of science going on, so you can definitely do some really cool stuff. But what's really cool about this too, if I go back to this other one, is yeah, you can use it for gears, but it makes some basic things that you might be trying to do, like hubcaps or things like that, where you have basic shapes, a lot easier to do. So let's say we want to do a hubcap. It used to be a lot harder. Like you could create some circles and then scale them down and put them in MoGraph, and I didn't want to do it, but you can create some guides, and there's some really great tutorials for that. But check this out. Say we just want to make a hubcap. We can go to teeth, flat, so there's no teeth, and then we'll change inlaid to holes. And right now there's just one hole, so that's kind of weird. But we can turn up holes, and it's going to evenly distribute them. So if we wanted something with about 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 holes, we can add those holes. We can scale them up and make sure it doesn't break. We can scale that ring radius up and then scale them up. And we could even add an arc if they were kind of different hubcaps. And you can see that's all evenly distributing. So it makes that sort of thing really easy, because all you have to do is put it in an extrude object, and then you can add caps and change the fillet and get your bevels, or put it in the new bevel deformer. And you don't have to kind of do the complex process of organizing very mathematically symmetrical stuff. This does it for you, and we can just still go to our extrude and make this deeper. Say if we wanted this to be like a 6 shooter, then we could just go to inlay and change it to 6 and scale these up, and there we have a 6 shooter. And we can go to the radius of the central hole, scale it up if we wanted, and we could even turn that off. And if we go to content browser now, there's actually a bunch of these built in. If we go back up to presets, prime, 3D objects, cogwheel objects, look at all these. There's all sorts of crazy accurately built things, like all these clutches and gears and all sorts of stuff that they've already built using these. So it's all editable, and even like miscellaneous shapes, like you're like, I don't even know what the hell that's for, but you can build it. And saws, because you can even make saws and things like these really specific and small little watch gears. You can do so much stuff with this one little update to the cogwheel. And what's really cool is there's engineering behind this, and they've, you know, really thought this out with actual engineering terms like this stuff. So it's actually relevant to the idea that all these gears and stuff could fit together, because that's what gears are for, obviously, and saw blades, I guess. But it's built in a really smart way, so you can do, again, some really cool stuff with dynamics to make them all fit together here the simplest way, but you can really keep going. And that content browser point brings me to number 4, a packed content browser. So one of the things that's really great and new about R16 is this reflectance option in the shader in the material editor that's completely rebuilt, and you could really build any textures from this. It's really deep, and you can do so much with it, and you really only need this reflectance tab to build most things now, because it's really adding it all together. You can add layers, and in our content browser there's a lot of pre-build things like materials and objects using these. So if we go to something like broadcast and materials, there's all new materials, and these are just built up of the old ones. If we go to metal and look at some of these, I'll just drag a few in my scene and click. These are built with the new reflectance in mind. So I'll just grab another one and look at all these metal objects, and I can go back up. Let's go to ice and snow. Here's an ice block, but when we open it up, look at that. It is built with some reflectance. So you can really dig into how the new reflectance material is made by all of these built-in materials. Even some stone stuff has some reflectance because everything has reflectance because it's just light hitting things. And the content browser is so packed. There's so much stuff in it, not just materials, but all sorts of presets and stuff like that, broken down into whichever version you have. And if you do have Studio, then you have all of them, and you can go through and look at all the broadcast stuff and look at all the visualized stuff for things like interior design and layout and things like that, all the way to Studio to where we get our motion tracking and stuff like that. And there's so much stuff in here. If you're on the fence about whether it's worth it, getting all this free shit to play with is really, worth it enough. This has been what I've been spending a lot of my time doing, is just digging through all this stuff and learning by looking through all this stuff, because there's so much free crap that comes along with it. And there's so much fun toys to play with, all in the content browser. And this is kind of a two-parter, because my number 5 one is part of the content browser. It is these pre-built modular objects in the content browser. So pre-built objects are great. You don't always need to model everything, and it's not always worth it. Say you just need something like, let's go into cutlery, I don't know, like a fork. It's not always worth it to make a whole fork or knife. You can just grab them, but sometimes it's not exactly what you want. And what's really awesome, there's all these other objects, and maybe the knife wasn't the best example, but butter knife is a butter knife. You don't really need to change it. But there's all these really awesome objects. Let's take a look at some of these in visualize 3D objects. To start out with, if we go to packaging as an example, look at this lotion tube. It's obviously a tube of lotion, and we can solo it, and I'll solo my hierarchy, but it has all of this user data tab with all these customizable parts, and you can change the parts. So it's pre-built objects, but you can customize them, and there's a lot of these. So let's look at this box. This one is one of my favorite little things because it's a box, and that's great. But if we click the whole container, the user data has angles for the box opening, so we could animate the box opening. You can change the textures and all of that. And if we dig a little further and back it up into Studio 3D objects, you can see there's all these modular ones. So there's doors, pavement, staircases, windows, all modular. And if we just grab one of those, I'll grab the spiral staircase, and in my browser, I'll just delete everything else real quick. And those were great cogwheels, but let's just focus on the staircase right now. I can grab this, and if I click on the part that is modular, look at this. They've built all this stuff with all of these crazy editable and animatable settings. So we have a spiral staircase, but say you're doing some interior design or a really cool spiral staircase, you could start with this one and edit all sorts of stuff like stair height, width, angle. Look at that. It's animating around how big it is. Let's just shoot it up a little. Stair count. And all this stuff is animatable. So say that we just want to do, a really cool animation of a spiral staircase growing out of nothing. If you watch those home shows, they're always kind of come up with new ways to make appliances and houses fly in there and kind of blow out, and that's all they do. So, if you happen to be some animator in a home show, oh man, you just hit the jackpot, because this is all that you're going to need to do anymore. And if we look at this is just the staircase, and look at all these settings that it has, and each one of these objects has that much. Let's look at the straight staircase, and if we go to that, it has the same thing. There's a bunch of user data, and we can change all sorts of stuff. And there's tons of objects in the content browser that can do this, and it's a really useful way to work and kind of look around and see not only what objects there are, but how you can customize them and really animate them and do some really cool animations with them to get some really nice effects when you end up rendering. So there's a lot of awesome stuff. I said the same thing at the last video, but there's some great new stuff in R16. There's 5 more new things that I'm excited about, and sprinkled in a bunch of other new stuff. and all sorts of new stuff you can do with notes and gears and tapering and deformers and all these pre-built objects and materials and stuff in the content browser. And I can't stress enough, there's so much more stuff. That was just a couple of random objects of clicking around, but there's so much more you could do in there with all of their stuff. So it's some stuff I'm really excited to show off and teach everyone about. If there's anything else you want to see about R16 or you're wondering about, and anything you want to ask, always be sure to mention in the comments, and subscribe on youtube.com/Sean Frangella, and hit me up on Twitter at Sean Frangella, and like the Facebook page if you want to ask questions, interact on the social networks, request tutorials, and if you have any questions about anything I've done, or little stuff you'd like to see, or you think there should be an 11th tip like this freeze thing, which is great too, just let me know in the comments, YouTube, Twitter, and anywhere on social networking. You can always find me. And as always, thanks for watching, and I will see you at the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.